So hello, my name is Kristen Hoffman. I'm the director of the Autism Center at Misericordia. I'm very excited to be here tonight with Sandra Kirchner, who is the director of the Hazleton Autism Family Support Hub. And we are going to be discussing tonight how to present Zoom fatigue, a issue going on with pretty much everybody in schools right now, as most are at least partially working in a distance learning environment. We are hearing from teachers and from parents that the students are really having a lot of trouble attending for these hours in the day in a distance learning model. So we are very excited to have Mary here with us and Sam, who are both going to be giving their perspectives. We're going to start with Mary, so I will throw it over to you.
All right. I'm going to share my screen real quick. My name is Mary Suey. I am a licensed psychologist here in Pennsylvania, and I work at the Children's Service, speaking with you about child development and autism spectrum disorder. So there are 5 main areas of development, which is our ability to learn and solve problems, social and emotional development, which is our ability to interact with others, including and self-control too in terms of our emotions. There's speech and language development, which is our ability to understand and use language, so it's our language abilities, as well as our fine motor skills, so using our hands and fingers to pick things up, so things like that, skills to do those types of things. And then our gross motor skills development, so our ability to use our large muscles, so running, jumping, things like that. All right, so we're going to go into different milestones for kindergarten through 3rd grade. And then we'll break it down into 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. So in terms of kindergarten milestones, cognitively, kindergartners should be able to count to, they should be able to draw a person with at least 6 body parts, printing some numbers or letters, so starting to do that. Shapes, so square, circle, triangle, as well as basic knowledge of everyday things. So knowing that money buys things, things like that. In terms of social and emotional development, kindergartners typically want to please others and want to make their friends. They are aware of gender, so they're aware that they are male, they are female, and they can differentiate reality, and they start to show more independence when they hit kindergarten. And they can be demanding at times, so if they want something, they want it now, or they can also listen to everything you ask them to do. So it kind of ebbs and flows. In terms of speech and language development, to be able to speak pretty clearly, can tell a pretty simple story like, oh, I took the dog outside today. Can use future tense, so oh, to park, and they are able to say their names. In terms of motor skill development, they should be able to stand on 1 foot for about 10 seconds. Use utensils, so forks, spoon, knives, butter knives, preferably not sharp knives. They should also be able to use the bathroom on them, and it should be able to swing and climb. 1st graders cognitively should be able to tell you their age, count, and they should be able to count at least up to 10. They should start to understand cause and effect. So when I do something, there's either going to be a consequence, or they should start to be able to differentiate cause and effect here. Learning how to write, as well as starting to understand the concept of time. So they might have a Paw Patrol or something that they like to watch at a certain time. So they start to have that that development and understanding, oh, it's 6 o'clock, Paw Patrol's on. In terms of social and emotional development, they should be able to start engage in imaginative play here. So up until this point, it's more as it's supposed to be a car. Whereas now they should start to be able to understand, like, oh, I'm a superhero, and pretend to be a superhero, or, you know, other things like engage in that make-believe type of play. Around this age, they feel like a big kid, especially they have younger siblings, they want to be sister, the helper around the house, and they start to understand the feelings of others, which is really nice to see at this point. So if sad. They usually like to play with friends at this time, typically sticking to same gender friends. That's just who they're drawn to. They can relate a little bit better to someone who is the same gender at that time. They are able to develop a good sense of humor with the sarcasm and start kind of making little jokes like the knock-knock jokes and things like that. In terms of speech and language, to describe their favorite TV show, movie, they should be able to spell their name, write some letters and numbers, and be able to around this age. In terms of motor development, they should have pretty good balance at this age, so be able to stand on one foot pretty successful. Running, jumping, skipping, so being on the move, going around a lot, getting some of that energy out, and they should be able to catch a ball themselves. In second grade, cognitively, we should see kiddos having time, so understand seasons. So winter, spring, summer, fall, understand the months, so January through December, the weeks, and start to as well and understanding those as well. You will see that their learning style does start to develop around this time. So if they're more of a hands-on auditory learner or more of a visual learner, you should see that start to developing around this time as well. They should also be able to problems using objects. So they have like those little counting beads that they should be able to use, as well as like those little counting bears, things like that, to be on 2 + 2, things along those lines in terms of math. In terms of social and emotional development, this is where you'll see relate to others emotionally, and have some sort of feelings for that, like, oh, you're sad and it makes me sad to see you. They should be able to start overcoming some fears around this time. So a lot of kiddos who are younger have fears like monsters are under the bed. So they have fears around this age as well. Developing some pretty solid friendships too. They tend to play in larger groups as well. Speech and language development. They're going to speak more in situations where they're comfortable. So having good conversations with like close friends around this time. They should also have that good articulation too when they're speaking. So pronouncing word articulation. They also tend to become better readers around this time too. Have some difficulty to pretty much be able to spell basic words like the and along those lines. In terms of motor development, in activities that use large muscles, so swimming, climbing, things like that, drawing a person with 12 parts, holding and using scissors correctly. In terms of third grade milestone, they should be able to count by 2s and 5s. They should know the day of the week. They should be able to do simple addition and subtraction and know the difference between and read simple sentences. Socially and emotionally, they should want to enjoy being around their friends a little bit more than being around their parents. Of security in involvement in group activities, so being on a sports team, being in different clubs. So feeling comfortable. At this age, we see a rapidly changing emotions. So one second they might be really happy and cheerful. The next second they may be screaming, yelling, crying, throwing. So that's pretty typical for third grade. They also may be impatient at times. So if they want their candy bar, they want it now, prefer instinct than waiting a little bit of time to get that. And you see more of an interest in money around this age too. So doing chores, things like that to build themselves so they can feel a sense of responsibility, like going to the store and buying something. Also, for speech and language development, they should be pretty well developed around this time. They should have pretty good grammar, some grammar errors, obviously, are acceptable, are interested in reading books, although some kids just really don't have an interest in reading books. Maybe it's comic books, maybe it's something a little bit different versus chapter. At this time, they're also working on written spelling and grammar as well, but still pretty well developed. In their skill development, they should be able to tie their shoes, draw geometric shapes, so triangle, rhombus, thing, and they should be able to draw a person with 16 features. And you should see more of an interest in sports, hobbies. Alrighty, so linking our developmental, I just wanted to give you an overview of what autism spectrum disorder is according to the DSM-5. So when we are seeing kiddos on the spectrum, we're looking at some significant deficits in social communication and social interaction. And this is typical. We may see it at school, we may see it in the community. And to meet that criteria, we're looking at social emotional reciprocity. And what that is, it's more of like if they're struggling to have back and forth conversation with others, to share their interests, their emotions, affect with others, or really just not interested in initiating. We're also looking at deficits in nonverbal communication behaviors. So things like poor eye contact, language. So if they're not making gestures, facial expressions, things along those lines, then they would fall into that criteria there. Deficits in developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. So having trouble making friends, if they've never had a best friend, if they engage in like make-believe with other kiddos, or really just not interested in having friends or interacting with their peers. Social communication and social interaction difficulties, we are looking at what we call restricted repetitive patterns of behaviors, interests, or activities, these for short. And this criteria kind of falls under the stereotyped repetitive motor movements. So we're like body rocking, echoing, if we're seeing a lot of speech being echoed. Also looking at insistence of statements to routine or ritualized patterns of behavior. So for this, if there's a very small change and we're seeing a kiddo act out, a sign that something's a little bit different in the routine and they can't really tolerate that change yet. Struggling with transitions, so going from like playing with toys, playing with games, to going to something that they may not want to go to, like log into school on Zoom. We may see a bit of, and then we are also looking at highly restricted fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity. So really being stuck on certain objects, certain things that they cannot stop talking about, thinking about, really hyper-focused on something there. Or we're looking at hyper or hypoactivity. So if they cannot tolerate it being hugged by other people or being touched by other people, or if they really want to be hugged by other people, really have connection with them. In addition, we typically see the symptoms present in the early developmental period, so anywhere from the month mark and on, which I'll get into in a minute, and we really see a significant impairment in functioning. So really struggle to function at home, struggle functioning in relationships with family members. And we do want to make sure when we are spectrum disorder that the symptoms that we're seeing are not due to an intellectual disability or global developmental delay. So there are 3 different levels of autism spectrum disorder. Level 1 being our more higher functioning kiddos. So individuals who have trouble interacting socially, they might appear to not really want to interact, but then there's moments where they do. Some difficulty switching between problems with organization and planning that impact them. So if they can't really get to that point where they want to be independent. That's what we're seeing with our level 1 kiddos. Level 2 is middle of the road, so requiring substantial support, so limited interactions. So sometimes they'll interact, most of the time they won't. Not being able to respond to social overtures from others. So if another, hey, do you want to come play? And they completely ignore them, then we might be a little concerned. As well as difficulties coping with change, able to handle those different changes in their environment and their routine, or other repetitive behaviors. So like the hand flapping, body rocking, toe impacting their functioning. Or if we're seeing distress or difficulty changing focus or attention. So really based on what they're doing, hyper-focused on it, cannot get their attention off of it no matter what you do. And then we have a level 3, which is kiddos, so requiring very substantial support. So pretty significant deficits in verbal and nonverbal communication. May not have a ton of, not have any gestures, facial expressions, the ability to kind of make eye contact at all. Very limited initiation of social interaction, interested in interacting with peers their age at all, maybe not even with younger kids or adults either. And pretty limited reaction overtures of others. So if another kid comes up to them, wants to play, they completely ignore them, continue doing what they're doing. As well as coping with change. So this is where we're seeing the big behavioral outbursts when something in their environment changes that they don't want to change, as well as stress with changing focus or action too. So these big tantrums and big blowouts when they are required to kind of change what they're doing. So the development and course of autism spectrum disorder, again, the symptoms are typically recognized between 12 and 24 months. See this earlier in their developmental period if their delays are pretty severe. It also may be seen later if the delays are more subtle. Sometimes for girls, we're seeing that they're diagnosed a little bit later because they're able to socially adapt a little bit more than boys are. We are also looking, the symptoms are most marked in early childhood. Early school years, grade is really a good time to be noting if we're seeing any delays in any of the developmental milestones. There are individuals who do deteriorate behaviorally during adolescence, but most kiddos improve. We do see a decline in functioning at times. Some of our older kiddos, but with the right supports and right treatment, they should be able to improve as they age. Minority of individuals living with ASD can work independently in adulthood, especially if they are working in their special, match their skills or special interests. And it is important to note that individuals who do have lower levels of impairment, so our kiddos who are diagnosed too, may be better able to function independently, but just struggle a little bit socially, and they are more prone to anxiety and depression disorders. So looking at the impact of autism spectrum disorder on cognitively, we may see intellectual impairment, so they may not be able to kind of keep up with academic demands, things going on, as well as we might see the opposite too. So we may see some kiddos who are really advanced and well above their peers in the class. It's difficult to be able to interact socially with other kids. They may have some difficulty learning the alphabet, counting, colors, socially and emotionally, like I said before. So we may see a lack of interest in social interaction. Some odd play, so carrying toys and actually playing with them, sorting toys by like color, by size, things like that. As well as objects. We may not see the facial expressions. We may not see them be able to identify their emotions. They may also lack that, not be able to control their emotions. So they're really upset, but they don't know why and they can't bring it down. They may also struggle to as well as not understanding that others may have different likes and dislikes than they have. Their small talk, they may not have ever had a best friend, and they may struggle with rules in conversation. So understanding that there's a back and forth in that conversation. It's not just me kind of talking all about Paw Patrol and everything I like about Paw Patrol and you just listening. It's more that back and forth dialogue. They may also struggle with those social cues. So if someone yawns while they're speaking, they may not understand that they might be lacking sportsmanship. So really struggling with winning and losing, struggling to follow rules in sports, or the consisting everyone follows the rules exactly how they're supposed to be followed, and really not being able to move past that during games. In terms of speech and language development, we may see a loss of language skills. So they say mama, dada, single words, and then all of a sudden stop talking completely. And that usually happens between 12 and 24, which is when we see that. There may just also be a delay in language development too. So maybe they're 3 years old and they haven't, started saying any words. Then we kind of know something might be a little off here. Also, they try to pull individuals by the hand with, if they want something, they can't really speak what they want, and they just kind of pull someone where they want to go. If they're not responding to their name when it's being, they're not asking WH questions. So what are we doing? Why are we doing this? Where are we going? Or if there's an improper use of pronouns, so saying you or she or her to reference themselves. If we're not seeing past tense verbs, so walked, verbs like that, or if they're not able to speak about everyday experiences. Now, a lot of times our kiddos, if you ask them what they did at school, lunch, things like that, that's pretty typical. But they should be able to tell you about some other more interesting things to them. Follow directions, especially if you give them multi-step directions. So that may also be a red flag. Attention to, so sitting here doing things that they don't really want to do, so trying to focus on schoolwork and doing all of that, we may see a lot of inattention where they're distracted, not super interested in just sitting here in front of the computer, and lacking of understanding of sarcasm. So if you're just a little cookie, they may be like, nope, I'm not a cookie, I'm whatever their name is. And not really understanding like that, something silly to say. In terms of motor skill development, we may see some delays with like zippering buttons, not being able to catch balls with their hands, struggling to walk up and down stairs, alternating by feet. They might hop and down 1 foot at a time, or if they're not really able to run or stand without support, so standing without holding on to, or if they cannot ride a bicycle yet, especially by 3rd grade, we would want to see them be able to ride a bike, even if that's with training, or hop, skip, or if they can't pour liquid from one container to another, if they're unable to use scissors or like struggling with drawing or coloring, as well as an inability to kind of pick up small objects too. All right. So hopefully that kind of clarifies for you kind of typical development and where kiddos should be meeting their developmental milestones, as well as how autism spectrum disorder can impact that development, and some writing for the end.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mary. Really appreciate that overview. It's a lot of information to digest for sure. Sam, I am going to push it over to you so you can give us your teacher perspective.
Thank you. There we go. Okay, so I am Samantha Pavick. I am a certified teacher in Pennsylvania for grades kindergarten through 6th grade. My background, a little bit about me, I was a TSS worker for quite a few years for children with autism. I've taught 2nd grade and 5th grade, and for the last few years I've also been teaching in an online learning format as an ESL teacher for VIP Kid. So before I even got started in teaching, my own as a TSS worker for children with autism, I feel was a huge benefit to me coming into the classroom as a teacher because of all of the tech that I learned, that I also saw teachers in the classroom using for students, and I felt that background and those techniques I learned and used on a daily basis helped me be a better teacher because I saw the benefit of using them for all children and not just on the spectrum. So I see the benefit to those techniques and those teaching strategies for all students. So with just some best practices for student engagement. So the first thing here is varying your teaching methods to reach all types of learners. Oh, and I think Mary had touched on this a little bit about the different types of learners, your visual learners, your auditory learners, your hands-on learners, your kinesthetic, we need to get up and moving. I definitely know that this is something I've heard a lot of teachers, parents and students talk about with the learning, how difficult it is to just sit and listen to a lesson for long periods of time without having some interaction throughout the lesson or other modes of engagement that kind of tap into each of your learners' preferred methods and how they learn best. So incorporating those different strategies or techniques to tie into your learner, that will just make your lessons go that much more smoothly, and it will engage your students in ways that they learn using that PowerPoint presentation for your visual learners, bring in some music and songs for your auditory learners. So just switching up those techniques is really going to get that student buy-in. You're going to reach a lot of your learners in different ways. Building and maintaining positive relationships is so, and it's so important now, especially when we're not able to be physically in the classroom with students. I know some of us are some of us are doing a hybrid approach. Some of us are in the classrooms face to face. So whatever you're teaching at this point, you know, building and maintaining those positive relationships. You might be seeing behaviors from students that they don't typically do if they were in a one-on-one or in classroom face-to-face setting. They are experiencing a lot of different at this point, as we all are, in trying to cope through a pandemic and the different things that brings into our lives for students, but for their families as well. So it is so important to build those positive relationships with your students into behavior in the classroom. If you're not seeing them engage with you or seeing them maybe perform to the expectation that you know that they can, having this solid relationship with them is going to help them in your classroom. It's going to help them to feel safe. It's going to help them be confident in the classroom, even if they don't feel, if you don't feel that they're engaging much. As long as they know that you are there and they're about them, you can make progress with them. So just keeping that in mind is to, you know, build and maintain those positive relationships. The next thing is integrating technology. And of course, we're all doing that now with distance learning and all of the different platforms that we're using. Maybe you're using Canvas or Zoom or Teams, different ways that you can engage them with this technology is through discussion boards. You can pose a question and have them answer it and comment on each other's responses. You can incorporate virtual labs for science, field trips, just some different ways to bring in that technology component. Hands-on or project-based learning, this is highly engaging a technique or strategy that you can use in your classroom or through distance learning as well. Incorporating students, so make sure you're tying in what your students' interests are into your lessons. So getting to know your students, building those relationships, using their interests directly in your lessons is going to get that buy-in from them. I know all of my students loved playing games, so these can be Kahoot games, these could be Jeopardy games, any kind of educational game that you can tie in your content to get them interacting with each other is really going to kind of make that class time a lot more engaging. And personalize learning to them and their needs. Know your students the best, so you know what your students need and how they learn the best. And so just tailor your lessons to accommodate that. Let's talk about active learning. So this is really a student-centered approach to learning. Are engaged in collaboration with each other, discussion, and problem solving. Each lesson that you present should have a component of active learning involved. Not the whole lesson. You don't need to worry about, how can I have my students up and move interacting, and I don't think that that's absolutely necessary, but I do think that some component of a lesson should rate active learning. So here are just some examples that you can work into your lessons, and these can be done in Zoom, or they can be changed to be used in a digital format or online. So think, pair, share is something that I used a lot in my classroom. Some teachers are like, well, how would I use this, through Zoom, and how am I going to pair up students so they can talk to each other and collaborate with each other? So breakout rooms are an option. So you can put 2 kids in a breakout room or 3 kids to collaborate in a breakout room, give them a few minutes to collaborate, discuss it, then bring them back to your Zoom, your full Zoom session, and have them share out their answers and their discussion. You could also collaborate in shared documents like Google Docs or Google Slides, so something that they can work on simultaneously with each other, contribute together, and then present to the class. This could also look like role-playing with each other. Also just discussion. So a story, and you're having discussion about the story. Using Bloom's taxonomy, you can look at the different levels of questioning, so those high thinking skills, and kind of tailor your questions to your students as you're having a discussion about the story in class. Again, that game-based learning. So here comes our Kahoot games and our Jeopardy games and all of those fun games that students love. They're learning when you're making it a game. So it's just another way to kind of keep their attention, get them involved. Most students have kind of a good streak, so they really get into it that way. That it gives them collaboration skills to work in teams as well, or individually. Also, some reflective writing. So this could be something like at the end of your lesson. It could be an exit ticket. You post a question, or give me 3 things that you learned from today. What was the most important point of the lesson today? So just some reflective writing at the end, or an exit ticket. Whole brain teaching. I love the idea of whole brain teaching, and there is a website I would highly recommend going to, and I have it listed here, to check out all of their free resources. They have tons of free and trainings and all sorts of resources that you can use in your classroom. So I would highly highly recommend looking at this, but just a little bit to touch on what whole brain teaching is. It's an instructional system. It was developed by Chris Biffle in 1999. So it's based on people learn best by seeing, saying, hearing, and doing something. So combining all together. By using whole brain teaching, you're activating all parts of the brain, which will maximize engagement in the learning process. So as you can see here, all of the different parts of the brain. So the seeing, the saying, and the hearing, and your doing part is all of those parts of your brain. And when you engage all of those parts of your brain, it improves your memory processing. So you can remember things more and understand them better. Whole brain teaching really encompasses student engagement. That's what we're really trying to maintain through this distance learning. And I know it's such a struggle for teachers and for students. So it's really an engaging process and technique. There's synchronization because students are doing it all together with the teacher. And there's collaboration with peers. So this combines active learning with classroom management, which I really like. It also chunks learning into manageable parts. This is also a best practice in classroom teaching as well as online teaching. You can take your lesson, whether it's an hour long, or minutes or 20 minutes, depending on the grade level that you're teaching. I know that Mary had talked about the different developmental expectations for students at different ages. So maybe you have a 20-minute kindergarten lesson, you can still chunk that down into more manageable pieces for your students. So maybe 5 minutes of direct instruction, then go into a cooperative learning activity. So get them working with a peer and then giving them immediate feedback. Or that you can work as a group after the direct instruction, have them repeat back to you using action. So really chunking it down into small bits and pieces. So 5 minutes on your first topic, and then you can move on to that second one, 5 more, and then do an interactive activity or cooperative learning activity. Then move on to the next topic or the next point in your lesson. So then you take that lesson and you break it into 4 parts for them. And it's easier on time management because they don't realize that they are even a 20-minute lesson because you're breaking it down for them into much easier manageable pieces. So I think that's a really great part of this whole brain teaching. Also, it incorporates academics, social skills, and character education in one approach. So I like that it's all encompassing to all of those things that are so important to portray to your students throughout the day. And it's appropriate for all ages and classrooms as well. So this in kindergarten, I've also used it in 5th grade classroom, and it works for everybody. So I love that. A technique that I learned about when I started ESL teaching online is called total physical response. This is also a whole brain teaching method, and it's widely used by ELL and ESL teachers and students because it's a developmental teaching strategy. So it helps students develop language. It also is useful in teaching vocabulary. So I feel like it's beneficial for students that are not ELL and not ESL students, but all students. So total physical response connects vocabulary with and language, and it enhances language acquisition. So this is where the teacher would pair a movement and a language. So you're pairing these things together to teach, and this is a very effective strategy. So it engages the whole brain, both the left and right side. So there's that whole brain learning again, and it utilizes, by utilizing the different parts of the brain, comprehend greatly improves, retention of content and information and material also improves. So here's using TPR in the classroom. It appeals to the different types of learners that we talked about, specifically your visual, kinesthetic, and auditory learners. It's used by both the teacher and the student. So again, we have active learning. It increases memory by use of physical movement paired with. It also creates a more relaxed classroom atmosphere. It reduces pressure and stress because first the teacher is modeling for then the students are doing it with the teacher. You can also have students model for each other. And at first, you're not expecting language from the students. You're just expecting them to mimic your gestures, your facial expressions, your movements. So like I said, because this is mostly language acquisition or language learners, it's more important for them to be able to mimic your movements for understanding before you expect them to verbally repeat after you. So once they have that listening comprehension, then the speaking skills will come next. This can be used in small or large groups. In my classes that I do online, it's one-on-one, so they can be used in a variety of ways. Like I said, supports that listening comprehension and speaking skills, and it improves language and vocabulary. So there are types of TPR that can be used. The first is instructional TPR. This is where the teacher will communicate their expectations. It does not require the students to mimic or repeat after the teacher. So this could be something like classroom commands. So look at me, listen. Why? Job. So it can be all those things, those questions, commands, and praise for the students. You're pairing that movement, that gesture, the verbal language, but you don't expect the students to copy you with those things yet. So that's your instructional TPR that you can use during your direct instruction or when you're giving directions or commands. The second part is your educational TPR. So this is where the teaches new words or phrases by using physical movements, facial expressions, and gestures. This is where you want students to copy from you. You can be teaching action words, feelings, animals, foods, weather, a whole lot of different things. So this is beneficial for when teaching vocabulary. That's what I mostly use it for in my classes and through my online teaching. So you're also listening and responding with body actions, so that the students are listening and responding with their actions. Didn't want to do that. I want to go back. There we go. Sorry about that. So how can you use TPR in the classroom? So here's just a little breakdown of how I would use it with students, either through Zoom or one-on-one, small group, large group instruction. So if you have a vocabulary lesson, for instance, you want to select a word. So you also want to choose any props that might be helpful, a visual picture to help you show meaning of that word. So you can gather anything that might be useful as a visual aid. Then you would do the teacher mark. So the teacher would say the word and demonstrate whatever the physical action, movement, or gesture is with that word. Then you would have modeling. So you can call on volunteers to have them repeat the action and repeat the keyword or phrase. Then you're going to ask for participation from the whole class. So all students are going to mimic your body movements or gestures and repeat the word or phrase. If they're ready for that, doing the action, that's okay too. Tailor this to your students and their needs. Also, it's important that you would next write the word on the board so that they visually see the vocabulary word or the phrase that you're working on. And then you just want to really make sure you're reviewing these words, really practicing them. Here I have student leaders. So what I really like to do and what my students really liked to do when I would do a lesson with and then we would, we would do that maybe on a Monday to introduce it. And then throughout the week, we would have student leaders. So I would ask them at the beginning maybe of my math lesson to have volunteers that would come up to be our student leader to lead our TPR review. So whatever our lesson is for that week, I'd come up, and so they would say the vocabulary word, and the rest of the class would have to show the gesture, or the leader, the gesture, and the class would have to say the vocabulary word or the meaning or the definition of the word to show their understanding. They really are engaged by this technique, and they really love to be involved in it. And I saw so much growth from my students when I started to incorporate just this simple of using gestures and having them interact by using gestures. So just one of the really easy and quick ways that you can kind of that student engagement, get your students moving, activate all parts of the brain, and engage their memory and understanding.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sam. That was actually very interesting. That whole body teaching. Is that right? Am I getting it right? Very interesting.
Whole brain teaching. Yes.
Whole brain teaching. Thank you. No, it's very interesting. And I mean, it makes a lot of sense, right? The more that they're actually physically moving and engaged, of course, they're going to be more engaged. So that is excellent. Sandy, did you want to talk about kind of what our next steps are?
So whether you're watching this live or whether you're seeing a recording, if you're intrigued by what Samantha talked about in terms of active learning and the teaching methods, but you're thinking to yourself, told me all about it, what does that actually look like? How do I actually do that? Then you're definitely going to want to tune in group, which will be a little different than what we've been doing, rather than a web where you can see us, but we can't see you, and you can only really interact with us in the chat. Our next event will interactive workshop more format, in which Samantha will be presenting a live lesson where she'll use all the techniques that she just explained to us about, and you can experience it as the student, and then also be able to ask her questions about how to as in your own classroom. So we are super excited about that. We had originally planned to do that. You may have seen the flyers for it, but in order to give some time to people and have a little more preparation for it, we are going to be pushing it back by a week or two. So we don't, but definitely keep an eye on our Facebook page, and then I will also put the information, seeing this as a recording later, the information about how to register, attend, and then in that group will also be presented then. So yeah.
Well, that sounds, I think it'll be great to really have it all tied in, having a night to kind of understand the methodology behind it, and then the next night really kind of have a real visual of what that looks like, I think will be very important. So on that note, I think that is it for this evening. And I will be, when we have the YouTube link, I will send it out to everyone who was registered, and we can include the link to register for the discussion groups as well to that.